Hello, I'm Carol Gyzander. I'm going to read a story from Merely This and Nothing More. Edgar Allan Poe Goes Punk. This is an anthology of stories from Writerpunk Press, where we take Poe stories as our inspiration and create steampunk, cyberpunk, biopunk, other kinds of stories out of them. Mine is titled The Clockwork Raven. Basically, I always enjoyed Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Raven, where the bird flies in and he's getting more and more concerned that the bird is trying to do something to him. Perhaps it is. The Clockwork Raven by Carol Gyzander. I stood in the darkened courtyard in bleak December, buffeted by the cold night wind. The gas lamp on the post behind me was unlit, and thus I could see him through the partially opened window. He sat at the table before the dying embers in the fireplace, head in his hands, and occasionally looked up into the distance. He would turn his attention to the volume of forgotten lore on the table in front of him and busy himself with the pages for a time, only to have his head bow and his shoulders shudder. He had a scarf draped on the back of his chair, and I recognized it. I knew it was hers. It had belonged to Lenore. He stroked her scarf with his fingers, smiling slightly, but then frowned and rubbed his brow. He turned his attention back to the book with a sigh. I knew what was in that book. I knew better than he. Why had he tried to meddle in things with which he had no experience? A little knowledge was a dangerous thing. And now, in trying to usurp my love for my betrothed, she was lost. Lenore. I shook myself and pulled my top coat close around my neck against the driving wind. He would need to be controlled, punished. He could never be allowed to do that again. It was time. I strode back to my workroom in the adjacent block. As I turned the dials on the door, the tumblers clicked and the door swung open. I threaded my way through the long room, crammed with tables and lined with bookcases, plucking an ancient volume off the shelf and lighting the lamp as I passed. My device sat waiting on the work table in front of me. I removed the cloth cover and looked at it with a critical eye. Peering back at me were two fixed, black, beady eyes and a strong, almost menacing beak. Trailing away from the head, dark feathers lay smoothly across the back and flowed out to the wings. The feet curved into sharp talons. I turned it over and opened the plate on the underside. I smiled at the array of miniature gears and pulleys inside. This was one of my masterworks. I inserted the key into the first of 3 winding points. Turning the key in each one carefully until I met resistance, I listened to the ratcheting sound of the clockwork mechanism as it wound. When I removed the key the final time, closing the plate and turning it upright, I could hear a faint tapping sound. The bird stretched its wings and looked at me with those black, beady eyes. Considering the key still in my hand, I shook my head. Yes, it was working for now, but one winding would not last the time required. I opened my own volume of ancient lore, turning the pages to find what I sought. Speaking low and clear, I read the words and performed the gestures recorded so long ago, watching the raven as I worked. The eyes came alight with an internal fire. Its head tilted to one side as it peered at me, and it flapped its wings once, again. I concentrated for a moment and inclined my own head, searching inside my mind, and saw, through the raven's eyes, an image of myself looking back. As I moved around the room, the bird's eyes followed me, and the image changed. It's working, I said, and heard the words in my mind as the raven heard them. A feeling of faintness came over me under the raven's steady gaze. My shoulders sagged. I braced myself against the work table and fought off a sudden wave of fatigue, held a hand to my brow, blocking its view. I was not the one from whom it should draw its energy, not the one who must be drained, who needed to pay for what he had done. Donning my coat, I tucked the clockwork raven under my arm and headed back out into the night. This would do. Only this and nothing more. I rapped upon his window pane, then withdrew to the shadows of the courtyard. He stirred and looked about. Through the window opening I heard him speak. "Must be some visitor tapping at my door. Only this and nothing more." I tapped again to see what he would do, and hid behind the trees. He started, sprang to his feet, and looked around. Walking to the door, he threw it open and looked out into the hall. As I leaned closer, I heard him speak. "Who is that? Who makes the tapping?" He saw darkness and nothing more. His head turned back and forth as he searched the hallway's darkness. At first, his features were tight and pinched. Then they softened. "Lenore?" he whispered. Only an echo from the darkness murmured the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. He went back inside and shut the door, sitting once more by the fire. I released the raven and urged it toward the room with a gesture of my hand. The tapping of the mechanism grew louder as it moved. It tapped on the window pane again, echoing its internal clockwork. I saw him jump, rush to the window, fling it fully open and look outside. He said aloud, "It's the wind and nothing more." He couldn't see me standing there in the shadows, so I urged the raven forward again. The raven flew inside the room, past his head, and over the door. It landed on the bust of Pallas Athena, perched, and nothing more. He drew back as the wings beat past and closed the pane, but I tilted my head and searched inside myself, seeing through the raven's eyes. The man paced the room and watched the bird, then spoke out loud so that, through the raven, I heard. "What kind of creature might you be? What kind of bird are you? You're not the typical carrion carrier. I think you are a regal bird. What is your lordly name? Like the knights from days of yore." Said the raven, "Nevermore." The man looked about to see who spoke. The raven sat still upon its perch a moment, then turned its head to watch him. It looked at him and kept its peace. He calmed himself and looked at the bird. He spoke to it another time. "Will you just sit and look at me? How come you here to be? Others have left me alone before. When will you leave from off that perch? When go you from my door?" The raven tossed his head and croaked, "Nevermore." "It's the bird that speaks." The man's mouth flew open. He stopped pacing around the room. He drew away and wrung his hands. He knew not what to do. Through the raven, I heard his heart. It beat and raced. Then he smiled and said, "I thought at first that you were smart, that you had things to say. Now I'm sure it's just a fluke. These words you've learned from sitting at your master's side, who speaks thus when all is ill, when all his hopes are nevermore." The man jumped up and clapped his hands and looked the more content. He pulled the chair from where it sat and brought it toward the bird. He sat right down and leaned against the scarf of her, my love. He pressed against the scarf once more, which she shall touch nevermore. The raven fixed its eye on him. His shoulders sagged, and he held his head. He leaned back and raised the scarf to smell her perfume. Through the bird's eyes, I saw his face brighten just a moment, and then droop again. Through the window, I saw the raven's eyes grow brighter. The man's chin fell down upon his chest. Suddenly he pushed himself to stand up. "What are you, prophet or a thing of evil? Can you tell me what's to come? Tell me, I implore," spoke the raven. "Nevermore." The man's hands flew to his mouth. The raven to look out the window in my direction and tilted its head. It dared to question me? My creation wanted to let him off easy? No. A short, stabbing gesture of my arm caused it to turn back and focus again upon the man. It was inconceivable to show him any mercy, not after what he had done to Lenore. He asked again, "Are you prophet or bird of evil? Tell me, answer my soul that is laden with sorrow. In the name of God, will I get to embrace Lenore in heaven?" Answered the raven, "Nevermore." Staggering back into the seat, The man seemed to deflate before my eyes. His gaze fixed upon the bird. I saw his face go slack. I saw his head droop down. His chin sank lower upon his chest, and I heard his heartbeat slow. One arm slipped down and loosely hung. His fingers touched the floor. The bird kept its vigil through the night, as did I, from a seat in the courtyard outside the window. The man stirred once, and I noticed the ticking sound had grown fainter. The bird raised up on its perch and flapped its wings, tilting its head toward the man, who fell back into the chair again and collapsed in a heap. The ticking grew louder again, and the raven's eyes glowed brighter and stronger. Daylight woke me, and I looked in again. The ticking was the only sound I heard, and the raven, never moving, still sat on the bust above the door. Its eyes were bright and glowing. The light that streamed from out its eyes fell across the slumped form of the man, not moving. His deceitful soul is trapped under that shadow and shall be lifted nevermore.